Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to today's The Hindu Analysis, where today we shall be holding a discussion for few of the important topics and the news articles which have appeared in today's The Hindu Newspaper. We shall also be talking about the various different associated concepts and perspectives that you can develop with respect to those particular articles. And eventually we shall also be discussing few of the practice questions which you can expect from this area. Having said that, after the topics have been discussed, you can find an associated quiz on our Telegram channel. The link to the Telegram channel will be shared in the description below. So you are requested to pay attention to this discussion, and after that, kindly take up the quiz to assess your level of understanding for the topics. So without further ado, let us first of all take a look at the topics that we shall be discussing today. So we shall be discussing the editorial pages, that is the topic which has appeared, that is democracy and its structural slippages, and needed a new approach for data protection for minors. Then an India chapter for foreign universities, which is a kind of an evolving discussion. You would have heard and read about it, and you would have basically paid attention to this story evolving over the past couple of weeks. So that is again something in which we will throw some light on it. Then we will be talking about the aspect of light pollution when we talk about the topic of the dark sky is a natural resource, and how light pollution ends up influencing not only our lives, that is the human lives, but also the lives of various different aspects of wildlife and the biodiversity. Then eventually, we shall be picking up a topic from defense, that is INS Vagir, that is the 5th Scorpene submarine which has been commissioned into the Indian Navy. We shall be talking about few of the important nuances here, that what is the importance of this Scorpene submarine, what is the way ahead, what is it that India as a country should do in order to counter the Chinese threat when it comes to the Indian Ocean geopolitical realm, and also what are the projects which are languishing with the Defense Ministry which needs to be fast-tracked. So one by one, we shall be discussing each one of them, starting with the first one, which appeared in page 6 of the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper, and that is democracy and its structural slippages. Now, when we talk about this particular topic, here, the author has basically talked about the aspect of democracy and how the introduction of democracy in the various different parts of the world is commingled with various different contradictions and various different types of paradoxes which we experience on a day-to-day basis. This also talks about the fact that how democracy can become a bedrock for the rise of capitalism, which for a large portions of the world has also been held responsible for the growing inequalities in the world. Now, this particular topic, if you take a look at it, ideally it is important and relevant for your GS paper 2, right? You can expect a direct question being asked from here in terms of GS paper 2, but at the same time, as we will discuss later on, a particular topic like this can also be very relevant for your essay paper. And I will show you that how UPSC had picked up a direct question from this and framed it in the essay paper. So oftentimes when you get confused that how to prepare your essay, the key lies in the editorial pieces. Now, democracy. When we talk about democracy, the advent or the inception of the term has got a Latin origin. A Latin and a Greek origin, so to say. So here, democracy is derived from two words, that is demos and kratia. Demos refers to people and kratia here refers to power or rule. So in simpler terms, it ends up indicating the power or the rule of the common people. All of us, we know about Abraham Lincoln's famous quotation that democracy is government for the people, by the people, and of the people. So that is where democracy in its modern ideals is a kind of a representative one. But democracy overall across the globe is not a new concept. we can basically find evidences of this term being discussed in ancient Greece and also in the ancient Roman civilization. But not only that, when we talk about representation of the people and decision making by the larger masses, India also has got a very strong roots of democracy inscribed in its ancient past. When you read ancient history, you will come across various different types of organizations that we had. For example, we had Gan, Sabha, Vidhata, Samiti. All these basically were what? These were decision-making bodies where the kings along with the larger group of people would take decisions for the common people. So it would be absolutely incorrect to say that democracy in India had its advent after 1947. As is the case with the most of the modern literatures that you will come across, you will find that all of them, they talk about democracy in India has been conceptualized only after 1947. But rather, if you take a look at India's past, we do find the roots of democracy seeped very, very deep. And this is something that you can always highlight when you are writing about democracy and India. But having said that, democracy in its modern form and the modern presentation that we see today, where we have universal adult franchise. What do we mean by universal adult franchise? Where each and every individual has got the right to vote. Adult individual, obviously. Each and every adult individual has got a right to vote. And also in its modern form where women are also empowered to select the lawmakers who are going to govern the country in the coming future. So this form of democracy is something which has been prevalent in the world for the past 100 or at max 150 years. Now, even the Western democratic countries that we observe, for example, United States, for example, Britain, for example, Switzerland, for example, France, and so on, all of them, ideally, they postulate that they have had democratic setup for a long period of time. But there also, if you will look at this article clearly highlights that even till 1920 in United States, the African Americans didn't have the right to vote. So the universal adult franchise, which is an important DNA and aspect of democracy, that in itself was missing. In the case of Britain, we do know that women did not have the right to vote up till around 1930s. In France, women got the right to vote in 1944 and in Switzerland as late as in 1971. Now compare that with India. India, since the conceptualization of our constitution and since the first general election that were held in India in 1952, we have provided equal opportunity to the people in order to select and elect their lawmakers of the day. So in that way, we can always argue that our democracy has been holistic since day one in the modern era. Now, when we take a look at the other aspects highlighted in this article, here you have to understand that what are the basic tenets and characteristics exhibited by democracy. So here, for democracy to work, for democracy to succeed in any place, there are certain requirements which need to be fulfilled. For example, one of the basic to democracy is the devolution of power. What do we mean by devolution of power? Devolution means providing equal opportunities and responsibilities along with the necessary accountabilities to the various different decision makings for bodies. For example, in India, you have the Panchayati Raj system, you have the Gram Sabhas, the various different panchayats, the state government, the central government. So the decision making is not only concentrated in the hands of one individual or one government. It is basically devolved. It is basically entrusted into various different organizations and bodies so that they can be able to make decisions suitable to their own requirements and demands. Now here, once you provide that devolution of power, that automatically brings about a slight penetration and a slight trickle of welfarism and welfare schemes from the upper echelons of the society to the lower rungs of the society. That is, from the people who have the capital with them to the people who do not have any particular basic demands and requirements in order to carry out their basic necessities of day-to-day life. So devolution of power is very important. But then how do you attain that devolution of power? When is it that you entrust the various different local governments that you can also take decisions going ahead in the future? That will happen only when we have the premise of individual and equality. Let us understand this aspect. That when we have the penchant for individualism as well as equality amongst each and every individual, only then can we trust them enough to be able to make their own decisions, to be able to elect the respective governments. Why is it that United States, despite being one of the oldest democracies in the world, why is it that United States did not allow African Americans to vote up till 1920? That is because they simply did not believe that everyone is equal. The moment you start trusting the citizens, the moment you start trusting the society and the individuals to be able to be capable enough to carry out their electoral responsibility, that is when you give them some decision-making powers as well. And that in itself is devolution of power. So unless and until individual-based equality is not paid attention to, democracy is mere futile exercise. It will not be implementable in the true sense. Now, with the rise of democracy, there has also been observed that there has been a subsequent rise in capitalistic tendencies in many of the societies. Take the case of the various different democracies which are functioning across the globe. And take a simultaneous case of various different capitalistic or free market economies which are functional across the globe. You'll find a glaring coincidence and a similarity. Now, why is that? Is there certain flaw which is induced into the system itself? No. It is again based on equality. Now, in the Middle Ages and in the older times, the kings and the kingdoms had the rights to virtually all the resources in their own place, and no other individual could get that right from the kingdom or from the state. Now, when you have that right to equality, when you consider everyone equal, that means on the resources as well, everyone will have equal share. Now, here, when you have equal share on the resources, equal share on resources, equal share on setting up enterprises, that is when capitalism in a way thrives. Now, capitalism here need not necessarily be taken in a negative connotation. Here, capitalism indicates the existing of or the existence of a free market economy. Free market economy. And I hope that we understand the meaning of free market economy, where the demand and the supply drives the movements of the market forces rather than the government controlling them. We do know that wherever free market has got a free hand, so to say, there is a lot more capital creation, there is a lot more job growth, but at the same time, as the recent Oxfam report has highlighted, that also leads to a rise in inequality. So that again needs to be fixed by various other alternatives. But when you have the democracy and its roots planted deep, you will always have the rise of free market. That is also a kind of an argument that always you will come and you will interact with whenever you come across the India-China debate with regards to economic rise of India and how it compares with China. You will always find that India is more tilted towards a free market economy. Why? Because of its democratic roots. Now, when we say democracy, equality, as we have talked about time and time again, is a very important part in democracy. But at the same time, you have to understand that this urge for equality in terms of the mankind and the human population, this urge to gain equality is not a new phenomenon. This is something which has been prevalent for thousands of years. In fact, if you take a look back to the various different schools of thoughts, even various different religious practices and religions and sects which have emerged over the past few thousands of years, you'll find all of them were established in order to provide that level of equality into the masses. For example, here the author has taken the case of non-theistic religion. And when we say a non-theistic religion, here we refer to Buddhism. Now, if you take a look at Buddhism and the tenets of Buddhism, and if you go slightly back into the rise of Buddhism, you will find that everyone who went ahead to join the cult or basically follow the religious practices of Buddhism, follow the tenets preached by Gautam Buddha, thereby in Buddhism always there was this urge that the oppression, the inequality created by the Varna system in the society, that needs to be warded off. And for that, the Buddhists, they preached the tenets of equality, where everyone is equal regardless of your background. So that again can be traced back to the ancient urge which was prevalent in order to gain equality. Same is the case with the rise of theistic religions, for example, Christianity, Islam, Sikhism, and also the Bhakti literature and the entire Bhakti movement that you see in India, including the rise of Nayanars, Alvars, everyone. The Bhakti movement in India and along with Sikhism was also an effort by the masses to attain that level of equality. So that equality is what democracy seeks to achieve. And that equality is still the most elusive one. It has also manifested itself in modern forms and modern times in the form of Marxist socialism. Right? In the modern times, in the 20th century, you would have come across various different countries which followed Marxist socialism. And that school of thought is still very prevalent today. It is that thought process which gave rise to the very famous Russian Revolution. It is that school of thought which still determines the state policy of countries such as China. Now, even in this Marxist socialism, the idea was to uplift the masses in order to give the power to the hands of the masses. Again, the literal meaning of democracy. But did it achieve its ideals? Or did it fulfill its targets? The answer is no. Any form of egalitarianism or equality bearing measure that you inculcate or bring in the society, all that it can do is, it can remove few people in power, it can bring new people into power, but still you will have that large level of inequality between the decision makers and the decision followers. So that is where the urge for equality is still incomplete, and that is highlighted by the author. Now, here the modern manifestation in the sense of democracy, when we talk about, it is about the representative democracy. Representative electoral democracy. Now here, when we talk about representative electoral democracy, the literal meaning of it is what? The literal meaning is that basically you have the people being able to elect their own legislators, and those legislators are supposed to represent the interests of the people who have elected them or their constituency. That is the modern manifestation of democracy which is prevalent all across the globe. You have various different methods or methodologies of implementing that. For example, you have proportional representation in certain cases, you have direct representation and direct election in certain cases. When we talk about India and Indian democracy in the modern era is still evolving. It is still a work in progress. Now here, since the time that we conceptualized the new constitution of the country, since 1950 onwards, we have provided adult franchise, we have provided the right to vote to women, and we have been following something which is referred to as first past the post system. Now what is this? First past the post system. Now, this is something which is followed in India. Now, what is it in literal translation? It basically ends up implying that anyone who gains majority, that is the person who will win. Now, majority here does not necessarily mean 51% of the votes. It basically means that of all the various different candidates who were in the fray, the one who has got the maximum number of votes, that is the person who will be elected, right? So the person getting maximum number of votes. Maximum number of votes. For example, suppose you have various candidates who are standing in an election. Now, does not mean that for a person to win, that person needs to score more than 50%. Here, let's say a candidate has scored 35%. Or has gathered 35% of the vote share. The other candidate has gained, let's say, 40% of the vote share. And the third candidate has scored or secured around 25% of the vote share. So overall, you see that nobody has got an absolute more than 50%. But B here has got the maximum share. So B will be elected. Now, what is the flaw in this? The flaw is very apparent. While we say that B is the one who will represent that area, we also have to understand that there are 55% of the population who did not vote for B. Right? Only around, or not only 55%, but rather 60%. So there are 60% of the individuals who did not vote for B at all. So only based upon the views of those 40%, you have the people elected in power. Now this is a flaw. Now how can we say this is a government of the majority? Right? So that is a very apparent flaw. Even in cases where different kind of electoral practices are followed, for example, in United States, you had the very famous case where Hillary Clinton overall gained around close to 2.5 million more votes as compared to Donald Trump. But because of the Electoral College and the process of electing the president in United States, Donald Trump was made the president. So that is where various different democratic setups, they still have their flaws that they are still trying to find a way about. Having said that, in India, we have another lacunae. And the lacunae is the playing with these numbers. Now, how does it manifest itself? We do know that we are a very distinct, diverse, and a vivid society. So we have various different caste, creed, and cultural groups. Each of them now are not identified by their social needs and demands, but they are more or less associated with the absolute vote share that they bring to the table. That basically means that certain political parties, they can choose to mobilize only certain sections of the population while ignoring the rest. So while the Britishers, they inculcated the aspect of divide and rule, the modern form of democracy as is being practiced by various different regional and national parties, that is bringing in an aspect of avoid and rule. That is, you avoid certain sections of the society and nonetheless you manage to gather your vote bank. So this is where the democratic setup is not really trying to achieve its full potential. But having said that, still, it is the best possible solution and the best possible methodology of governance which is available. So that is something that you have to take care of, and that is highlighted by this article. Now from here, UPSC had asked a previous year question in essay, direct question, And the question was, man's capacity for justice makes democracy possible, but man's inclination to injustice makes democracy necessary. So this again talked about the importance of having a democratic setup being implemented and how it can be fruitful in the long run and how it is the only possible viable alternative when it comes to inculcating governance and good practices. So that is where these kinds of topics, they will help you gather a lot of fodder materials even for your essay paper. Now, coming to the next article, which again appeared in page 6 of the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. And this article is "Needed a New Approach for Data Protection for Minors." Now, recently, there was or there has been a bill which has been in a lot of discussion and debate, and that is the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill 2022. Now, this bill is being introduced by the government, and basically right now the government had opened up a window to seek advice and various different suggestions from the political parties, from the general public at large, and that basically window closed on 2nd of January. So this bill again is going to be up for discussion in the coming monsoon session. Now here, while this bill talks about data privacy and data protection, here there is a large resource pool of minors, of teenagers in our country, which needs to be catered to, which needs to be taken care of while devising any data protection bill. Now, this all started way back in 2017. It was in 2017 when Supreme Court, under a famous judgment, basically cited privacy, right to privacy, as a fundamental right. Right to privacy as a fundamental right, and that too under Article 21. So here privacy will also include data privacy, and we do know that as India embarks upon its journey for a digitized country, a digital India dream as it is referred to, we do face the issue of data privacy, data breaches, data leakages, and so on. Recently, you have had various different cyber attacks on the country, which also tells you how vulnerable the local population is to the cyber networks and the cyber crimes which are prevalent across the entirety of the globe. Now, India is a population where more than 65% of the population, is below the age of 35 years. So that means we have a huge youthful population, and more so the younger and the teenage population is also humongous. Now this is as per the previous data records. Obviously the new data records, new census data has not been released till now. The exercise is still being delayed. But having said that, the huge population of minors and the teenagers who access the internet on a daily basis, under this new Digital Data Protection Act, there has been a provision whereby parental guidance has been advised, right? And basically, if you take a look at it, under this new law, there are consent clauses for children and all persons under the age of 18 years. Consent from the parents. Now, when we talk about consent from parents, it becomes slightly problematic for a country which has a social milieu like India. Why? Because in India, when we talk about digital literacy, you will also adhere and agree to the fact that digital literacy is more prevalent in the younger generation as compared to the older generation, right? In the older generation, one generation or two generations beyond you, you will always find that people are slightly less comfortable with the digital medium. They have language differences and language issues and also tech issues which they face. So that is why most often the parents also rely on the knowledge and the information by the children in order to access the internet. Now here, when you provide parental control and parental consent, that again is a contradiction, and it vitiates the very aspect of having any kind of control at all. Because when the parents themselves are dependent and the children, they have to take responsibility, or they have to take a kind of a permission from the parents, it is a kind of a cross connection that will lead to no particular result. Now, it does not take into interest the best interest of the child. What does it mean? So basically, under the Convention on the Rights of Child, 1989, which India is also a signatory, and under the provisions of which India has also brought about various different changes in its laws, in the constitution as well. Under this, children need to be protected from malicious information as well. So here, when a young one, when a minor, when a teenager accesses the internet, there are a host of datas and there are a host of various different information that can basically vitiate the upbringing of the child. So that is where a slight regulation is necessary and important. But what can be the way forward? Can we go for a complete blanket ban? Can we include a very strict sort of, let's say, regulation or a regulatory ban? Because whenever you are confronted with a problem like this, the immediate solution that you will find rising from various quarters of the society is ban the websites, ban this, ban that, etc. But please understand, internet in the present day and age is an enabler. It is not an inhibitor. It allows the child, it allows the minor, it allows the young one to reach for various different possibilities which was not possible before. Right? For example, here the author has taken the example of the social media platform of Instagram. Now in Instagram and also in platforms such as, let's say, Facebook, you have various different content which at the same time are not particularly suited for the young ones, but at the same time you have various different collaborators, content creators, etc., who impart education and information on these platforms. So just putting a blanket ban can never be a solution. So what can be the solution? The solution can be, or should be, that the platform should be encouraged to come up with new products which are suitable for children. So platforms should make products suited for children. Now, on the face of it, this might appear to be a kind of a draconian ask, that how can you tell all the platforms to do this? It can be done. It is done in various different parts of the world, such as in the North American markets, in the Western European countries. You have the various different platforms and service providers who are modifying the content to make it ideal and suited for the children. But then the same needs to be brought into India, but because otherwise the legislations and the provisions in this law that talks about also a verifiable parental consent, that you need to be able to verify that your parents have allowed you to visit a particular source of information or a website. Now think about the intricacies and the complications involved. How will you verify it? For that, maybe you'll need to upload certain images, certain informations of your parents. Maybe a digital signature would be required. Maybe certain other data would be required for that verification to happen. Now, as soon as that happens or that takes place, imagine the cascading issues that will follow. You will have a lot more data to manage, and at the same time, you will be exposed to data breaches at a massive scale, at a massive level, where now by hacking into a system, an individual hacker can gain access to your parents' accounts, their bank details also nowadays can be accessed, and thereby the entire system can be compromised. So that clearly is not a solution. So what can be a solution going ahead and going forward? So going forward, when we take a look at it, way forward, we need to carry out, first of all, individual surveys. And these surveys, which are a regular thing in United States and European countries, these surveys are regularly carried out by the internet platforms. Now, what is the purpose of these surveys? These surveys are basically there in order to help understand the behavior of the child, that which are the websites that the child oftentimes visits, what duration of the day is the one where the child spends the time in front of, let's say, the system or a computer, and for how much duration, what time of the day. So those behavioral habits, if you carry out a detailed survey, if you reach out to the larger population, and a population of India, for that matter, can be the driver of the future global markets altogether. The sample size and the survey that you carry out in India would be implementable in rest of the world as well. So that creates a lot of incentive for the various different companies to carry out these surveys. Once you carry out these surveys, thereafter you can devise more innovative products which are suited only for children. And also, the parental guidance, etc., that age needs to be relaxed from 18 years, moving slightly backwards. Now, the argument can be held that up till 15, 16, 13, and so on. But that needs to be relaxed a bit. So there needs to be a slight relaxation of age when you consider the parental controls. Because please understand, in the modern day and age, when we take a look at and when we approach digital information as a source of vitiating the cultural ethos of the society, we are basically building a closed society. All we have to do is open up our eyes and ears, but at the same time be ready to filter out certain materials which are not suitable for the children, and this will come by self-regulation rather than the government imposing a complete ban on various different web practices. So that is the aspect here. Now, here you'll find the mention of Digital Data Protection Bill. That Digital Data Protection Bill is something which has been in news for the past 6 months. This is again something which will be in news for the next couple of months as well. So here what I would suggest you is, rather than learning and remembering the aspects of Digital Data Protection Bill right now, just observe the developments as it is moving ahead and be cognizant to the changes and the various controversies which are arising out of it. That will always help you devise the way forward when you're writing your answer. And once that bill gets passed, when it becomes an act, that is when you have to formally concretize it in your notes. Okay, so if you take a look at few of the salient aspects, so here the focus has been on the individual personal data, right? Individual personal data protection has been laid attention to. Now the clauses based upon which the article has been drafted, that is, the guardians of the children would have to provide verifiable data about their children. It is this verifiable data about their children that is what exposes them to data breach. It is this which exposes them to the various breaches of data which can happen. Now, the deemed consent has been introduced to cover various different non-consent based grounds for processing of data. The new bill seeks to establish a data protection board with individual officers to be able to adjudicate the matter of data protection when it comes to large companies and how they handle data. This is the board and the officers who will come into play. It relaxes the norms related to cross-border data flow, because earlier there was a very strict provision that all the data needs to be localized. So that immediately gave jitters to the large companies, because for them it would be a very costly process and a costly endeavor. So that has been relaxed slightly. The norms for the startups who don't have that much of a funding, for them also it has been relaxed a bit. And data breach has been taken up as very serious issue in this new bill, because for the benefit of end users, a sort of deterrent that is being introduced there, the data leakages and the punishment imposed for data leakages, that is very, very high, so as to ensure that there is a strict cyber security which is maintained. This again becomes important for your GS paper 3, where you have had questions regarding this being asked multiple times in the past 5 years in the mains examination. Okay, now moving to the next topic, an India chapter for foreign universities. Now again, if you have been following the news headlines for the past couple of weeks, this is an evolving story that you would come across. Now, what is this particular story about? An India chapter for foreign universities. So as per the rules and the regulations of the National Education Policy 2020, India has enabled and is encouraging various different foreign institutes and foreign universities to set up their bases and to set up their campuses in India. The idea is to have, let's say, universities such as Yale, Cambridge, Oxford, NYU, etc., having a branch and a large campus in India as well, a kind of a center of excellence for India as well. Now, while it is fraught with various different favorable as well as arguments against it, here you have to understand that there has been a lingering concern about the foreign universities coming to India for a very, very long time. Various different governments, the past governments also, along with the present government, they have always been concerned that how to raise the level of education in India, how to bring about a kind of a standardization of education in India which will attract the best minds of the world. Because we all know that the era which we refer to as the golden age for the country's growth, that was when you had large centers of learning such as Nalanda, Takshila, etc. in India, where scholars from across the globe would come in. Right? So that is something that the lawmakers, the decision makers, the policy makers have been trying to achieve. So what is the problem? The problem is that till now we don't have any Indian university excelling to that extent. So as a consequence to that, now the policymakers, they are trying to bring in the foreign universities into India so that we get an idea about the best practices in the area. The students can have the best education of sorts without the need to go and spend billions of dollars and when you move out to a foreign country. As per the most conservative estimates, every year there is an outflow of close to around more than $10 billion. Outflow of more than around $10 billion. Right? When Indian students, they move out to study. So that is where the whole agenda is being driven from. Now here in this, there are concerns both on the side of the state as well as on the side of the foreign universities. While the country is and the state is concerned of how to promote excellence, how to prevent malpractices, so that it should not be that in the name of Yale coming to India, you have under that garb many different types of substandard colleges also establishing their bases, where the candidates, they spend endless amount of money and the end result is zero or zilch. So that is where the government is very, very concerned that there should not be an encouragement of malpractices in the name of foreign universities coming in. So that is where the regulatory practices have been particularly well manicured, safeguarding the interests of the students, the local students, and protecting national and cultural interest, so that the national interest, the national values, the cultural ethos, that should not be vitiated. Now, this is the concern of the government. The concern basically on the side of the companies, or on the side of rather all the institutions, the concern has been very simple. That look, you are asking us to establish an institute or a university in India. We'll do that. But first of all, why should we do that? Because most of the larger and well-to-do and the famous different educational institutions that you have, for example, the Harvards, the Yales, the Cambridge of this world. Now, all these institutions, most of them, they are non-profit. They are not for profit. So thereby, there is no set incentive for them to come to a country like India and establish a large college campus where they also know that the standardization, the quality control, the quality assurance, the quality of the educational materials which are being imparted to the student, it will be difficult to maintain. So they have a concern as well, because nobody would want that under their name somebody is imparting a substandard education. So you have certain case studies and certain examples of countries in the Middle East and other countries in the world as well, who have managed to attract the universities, the good universities, to open up their bases in the country. But that has happened only when the local government has provided the land for free, the various different incentives and incentivization on the structural fees, etc. So the state ends up spending billions of dollars in order to accommodate a foreign university on their area, on their land. Now, that is again something which needs to be thought about. Is that the right way to go? Or should we be spending so much huge amount of money when we can use that money to, let's say, increase the research grants of our local institutions, of our local centers of excellence in humanities, in, let's say, technical education, in medical sciences? If we are able to do that, if we are able to create that kind of a university setup in India, you will automatically find these universities coming to India rather than the country spending billions of dollars. For example, take the case of our neighborhood in the case of China. Now, China spends so much amount of money into the Peking University, the university in Beijing, very prestigious university. The amount of money that China spends in Peking University is so huge, it can basically match the total budget of many of our colleges taken together. So that has basically led the Peking University to rise up the global charts and demand. So automatically you have scholars from across the world thronging and coming over to the Peking University. So something like that can be followed. In the present realm and in the present situation, the norms for the national education policy, which is trying to attract the universities, that is filled with contradictions. So as you can see, the National Education Policy 2020, it basically provided for a legislative framework facilitating entry for the universities, and here top 100 universities were talked about. Now, a legislative framework was also talked about, but top 100 universities, why will they be interested? So now these norms are being diluted. Now the norms have been diluted to the top 500 institutions, right? And not only the top 500 institutions, along with the 500 institutions, also any institution which is prominent in their own local country. So imagine a university which is famous in Romania. Just because it is famous in Romania, it does not have its name figured out in the entire list of the competitive universities across the globe. That university will have its utility or its branch in India. So the students won't be getting their fair share of the deal as a return of it. So this is where a lot of contradictions begin. But the contradictions do not end here. The contradictions also are about autonomy. Now, autonomy in what sense? Autonomy in terms of finance, autonomy in terms of academics, in terms of structure, and so on. Now, all the famous universities, they take a particular pride in having a kind of an academic autonomy where the individual scholars are free to voice any opinion that they can. Now that always would not work in a country like India, where we have many different religious, social and regional sensitivities to take into place. So will these universities be ready to compromise in that? If not, will the Indian state give them the free hand that do whatever you want? Obviously not. We have to take care of the morality, public health, law and order, the various different restrictions that you find encrusted along with the fundamental rights, they have to be taken care of. So that will impinge on the academic autonomy of these institutions. So that in itself is an inhibiting factor. Other than that, also, the aspect of financial autonomy. Now, many of these institutions, they hold public fundraising activities where you have large donor bases and you have large capitalists who pool in a lot of money to give to these institutions. Now, will that be a model which is going to be acceptable in a country like India? That again is a sticking point. Because in India, oftentimes when we think about education, the first idea is it should be free. It should not have any large donor base or something like that. Capitalists should definitely not be involved. So in that aspect, this is again a contradiction, and going ahead, we have to take care of the fact that just in the name of opening foreign universities in the country, we don't allow anything and everything to happen. Whatever resources, limited resources that we have, it will be good for us if we are able to channelize them into the existing center of excellence and create global universities of India for the world. Okay? Now, moving on to the next article. The next article talks about light pollution. Now, this article has been in the prominence or has been highlighted because of the fact that recently the district administration in Ladakh that designated the area around the Changthang Wildlife Sanctuary. Many areas of the Changthang Wildlife Sanctuary that has been declared as a dark sky reserve, means no artificial light will be given in that region. Now, light pollution is something which humankind has been experiencing for the past few decades. And since that light and the prevalence of light in our lives have increased, as you can see from the image itself, basically our visibility for the sky, that has reduced. Overall, across the globe, various different areas, they have been found to have an increasing level of non-natural light which has been prevalent. That non-natural light, which in a way you will also observe during night time, do one thing. In whichever place you are, switch off the light of your room and look up at the sky. You will observe that the sky is unusually lighted up, slightly bright. Why? Because of the various sources of light that emerge from the ground level and from the cities and the places that we live in. So that is something which is referred to as sky glow. The artificial glow of light, the artificial light that you have in the night sky, that is sky glow. So sky glow has been increasing in the world year after year. Overall, it has increased by around 10%, 9 to 10% between the years 2011 to 2022. Various different portions and regions of the globe, they have also experienced something to the similar account. For example, in Europe, you have an increase in brightness by about 6.5%, in North America by around close to 10.5%, and for the entirety of the world, the rest of the world, around 7.5%. Even in India, if you take a look at it, you have close to 20% of the population who is impacted by that sky glow, increasing sky glow. Now here the first question that will come into your minds is that, okay, there is light in the night sky. Why is it bad? Is it impacting our astronomical observatories and the telescopes? So the first answer is that while it does have a definite impact, but not in the case of astronomical observatories and telescopes, because those areas, they are kept as light-free zones. So there you don't have much of an impact. So where is the impact felt? The impact is felt by the larger biodiversity. If you take a look at it, the energy consumed is significantly high. Despite the fact that earlier you had the high energy consuming power sources, for example, large bulbs, etc., they have been replaced by efficient sources such as LEDs. But these LEDs, they still end up consuming significant amount of electricity because, why? Because rather than one bulb, now we have placed hundreds of LEDs. So that is where that sky glow is happening. It is not as if one bulb has been replaced by one LED. One bulb has been replaced by hundreds of LEDs. So the energy consumed is very high. Now, the impact on life. When we talk about our own body clock, internal body clock, which is also referred to as the circadian rhythms. These circadian rhythms are impacted. Our sleep cycle is impacted. That leads to secretion of hormones. And study has pointed out that once these are impacted significantly, this leads to rise in diseases and dangerous diseases such as breast cancer. So, it is as dangerous as it gets. But not only restricted to the human beings, we also will find that the trees, because of the artificial light, they are unable to detect the seasonal variation. So as to adapt their bodily functions accordingly, they are unable to adapt to the seasonal variations because the artificial light overall compensates for the lack of solar insolation. So again, impacting the growth of the trees. You have the nesting of the sea turtles. This again was a problem in India, where the beaches of Odisha, if you remember, if you recall, the beaches of Odisha, they were dotted with these artificial flashlights and floodlights. Now that basically provided a kind of a detrimental circumstances for the olive ridley turtles when they came to breed. So most of these turtles, they follow the sunlight for navigational purposes. And these artificial lights, they basically, in a way, impact their navigation, and that is where it prevents the movement and nesting activities as well. The young burrow seabirds, the burrow nesting seabirds, they do not take flight unless and until it is dark. So in case you have artificial light, they never take a flight, as is the case with clownfish eggs, which do not hatch when it is exposed to artificial light. So many of the larvae, they die within the eggs itself. Then along with that, the insects, they also indicate a changed pattern, where the predator insects, they carry out their activities for a longer period of time, thereby in a way disbalancing the food chain and the food web, which is prevalent. Along with that, many of the marine species and marine animals, they oftentimes they get trapped and they oftentimes they get beached because they are misguided by this artificial light. So the detrimental impacts are humongous. What can be the way forward? Proper circulation or proper regulatory practices by the individual society itself. You cannot have the governmental control in this, but the individual onus is something which needs to be taken care of. Now, moving on to the last article, that is INS Vagir, the 5th Scorpene submarine that has been commissioned by the Indian Navy. Now, this is a submarine which India has been making along with the French partner, that is the naval group, right? So along with that, India has been manufacturing these Scorpene submarines. Now here you will observe that it is the 5th one. So the first one was INS Calvary, which was commissioned way back in 2017. And the latest one is Vagir. There is one more to come out of the stable, that is Vagir. That is again something which India has to commission later this year or early next year. Now, while this commissioning is being hailed by the Navy Chief as being a momentous occasion, because in the past couple of years we have basically commissioned many of these submarines. So total, it has taken our submarine fleet into double digits. We have one nuclear submarine and the rest of them, most of them, are the diesel electric submarines. Now, why is it that we need submarines? India as a country sits atop the Indian Ocean. For that matter, India has to always keep in mind the rise of China as a naval power. And we have to make no mistake, China indeed is rising as a naval power. A few months back, you would have read the news story of the Chinese spy ship, a naval ship, docking in the ports of Sri Lanka. Now, why do you think this spy ship moves around the Indian Ocean? It is to be able to map the ocean floor. Because once you are able to map the ocean floor, that where there are discrepancies, where there are seamounts, etc., it becomes much easier for your submarines to be moving around. So that is where India needs to increase its submarine fleet. The problem with Indian submarine system is very simple. We have very limited supply of submarines at any point of time which are deployed. Most of them are under service because many of them are very, very old. Now, when you have sanctions imposed on Russia, even the upkeep or the retrofitting of the Russian submarines, that has become an issue. In that aspect, the diesel-electric submarines, they have to come up to the surface every few days in order to recharge their batteries. Right? And again, in order to refuel the diesel which they use as the fuel. That is why nuclear submarines are talked about. Now, in the case of the Scorpene submarines, India has also negotiated with the naval group in order to have air-independent propulsion. Air-independent propulsion. Now, this is a methodology which is prevalent in the submarines, whereby the submarines are able to recharge their batteries without coming up to the sea level. So that increases their longevity and the time duration for which they have to remain underwater. Even our western neighbor, that is Pakistan, that has already deployed AIP systems in its submarines. So it is a high time that we make our Scorpene submarines much more lethal, much more potent with the help of these AIPs. Having said that, these Scorpene submarines, they are advantageous over rest of the submarines in the sense that Indian Navy holds because it is much more silent. Silent in the sense, when the submarines move, they release bubbles as the propeller rotates underwater. These bubbles are the noise created by the submarines. The design of the Scorpene is done in such a way that the bubbles created are lesser. So that is why it is much more stealthier. It is not exactly a stealth submarine, but it is stealthier as compared to the rest. Now, a follow-on order has to happen under what is regarded as Project 75I. Project 75I. Now, this is about the follow-on order for these submarines. This is again something which is languishing in the works since 2007. 15 years have passed since this idea was conceptualized for follow-on orders after the Scorpene submarines. What will you make after you have finished the sixth submarine, that is INS Vagir, which will come later this year or next year early. So that Project 75I needs to be accelerated if we want to be the net security provider in the Indian Ocean that Indian Navy always counts as its doctrine. You have to understand that in the present day and age, the 21st century is being touted as a century of the Indian Ocean. And we cannot afford to be a weak naval power in the face of an over-expansive and over-aggressive China. That is where the submarine force is important and needs to be realized. So that completes the various different particular articles that we've had to discuss. Now coming to the questions. So you can expect different types of questions from the area. For example, democracy in its present form has got certain lacunae, but it still is the best form of governance available. There you have to bring forward the various aspects of democracy, including the historical evolution that we have talked about. Then what is light pollution? Discuss the consequences that it has on the natural ecosystem. Again, a direct question which you can always expect in paper 3. So this is something which you can hold up for practice. I would again remind you, take up the quiz on Telegram based on these topics and judge and decide for yourself how much of an understanding you have gained from the topic. That will be it from my side. If you like the video, please don't forget to click on the like, share and subscribe, and do tell us how this session has been for you. Thank you.